Hello and welcome to my Aviation Images. Again with Mr. Rick Lee.
We haven't moved. We've gone from lightnings to...
But his career is so diverse. We're now going to talk about his hot air ballooning career, which again is quite fascinating and not something I know a lot about. So I think we need to be educated. And the first image is a very, very artistic-y, lighty, shady, somewhat ballooning really.
Oh yes, this is... I started ballooning when I left Fraju in 1991, 92. I started looking at it in 1989, and I bought myself a little balloon. And this is a silhouette of my balloon, which I call the Green Dragon, on an early training flight. It's second-hand. It cost, I think it was about £3,500–4,000. It was bought off a gentleman in a pub who had advertised it out at Butley. And it just when the CAA in England had decided that all balloon pilots had to have licenses and medicals, and it became a commercial operation to operate one. And for the last 200 years, or 200 years before that, you could go and pay somebody a couple of quid, buy them a beer, and they could fly.
So going back to our previous podcast with Mr. Lee here, you didn't want to be an airline pilot. You thought, what shall I do next?
That's a good question.
So after flying like lightnings and all kinds of stuff, you decided to go very, very basic flying. But you need to listen to previous podcasts to get the background of why it really ended up here.
Well, right. And
the second picture...
It's, again, the Green Dragon.
Is that the same sort of day or period?
No, it's a nice early morning out at Lidford-on-Foss. And... this is the Green Dragon. It's nice silver and lime green. And the basket was a 77, a C-77, made in Bristol by, as we know, Bristol Balloons, which is Cameron.
Cameron, yeah.
And I met Neil Cameron, the boss, and his test pilots and chief pilots. Got a very good friendship with him, and I eventually bought my own commercial balloon in Australia. And this you
say C-70, is that the cubic size or something?
Yeah, 77,000 cubic feet.
Right.
Right, and they go, at that stage of the game in 1989, when I bought that, balloons were carrying up to about 6 to 8 people, 150s. And over the next 3 years, it's called bums on seats, like airlines.
So is that the common size of a balloon you see?
The 77 was, you could put sort of a tank in each corner.
Yeah.
It's a square balloon.
Yeah.
And you can put the pilot and a maximum of 3 people.
So like a standard balloon that you'd see doing flights.
The balloon is actually just like an airliner that you know a lot about. Each person is geared to 77 kilos. Even with you've got up to 20 people, they multiply by 77. Then you add the fuel,
unless they're American,
and then the weight they've got on, and the amount of air that you can heat up before the temperature gets above 120 degrees in the top when it starts melting. So every single thing is just like an airliner.
Yeah.
It puts it on a piece of paper and you sign and you weigh it and so on and so forth.
So the final one of this lovely...
That's a lovely picture there, taking off. And
nice
here it is again.
Yeah.
And it's a bit windy. And the best speed for a balloon to take off with is 0. But you can live with anything up to about 5 to 10 to 12 knots, depending on... Yeah, that's high. And it's
you've got open space and nothing there, you can go that way.
It's not easy to do it. And the best thing to do is like they do at Bristol, which is in a hollow with trees all round, and the wind can be going over the top. But this one has got a little bit windy. You can see the people holding the basket down. I've got the connection now.
Okay. Right, so starting off with this picture now, this is the first one in Australia.
Right, so I've got my commercial license. I've flown up to 160s. And the reason why I went to Australia was to fly with a balloon company called Outback Ballooning. A very large company. They owned a balloon company in Cairns as well, and they'd taken over about 2 or 3 other companies by almost false advertising in many ways. They had 3 companies in Alice Springs: Outback Ballooning, Red Centre Ballooning, and Ballooning, Outback Ballooning itself, Balloon Aloft and things. So they'd taken over from other companies. I didn't know this at the time, and I remember walking when I was at Fragile flying Hunters, coming up the steps one morning to fly my Hunter, and on the notice board was a picture of a balloon dropping from 3,000 feet, and 14 tourists were killed, including the pilot, in Alice Springs. And at the time I wasn't thinking of flying balloons, but the amazing thing was that I ended up flying for that company and flying over the spot in the desert south of Alice Springs where there was a memorial to these 14 people that were killed.
Tragic, isn't it?
And the guy I was working for was a guy called John Samby, and he was a South African, and he had a brother who was flying the balloon that dropped into the top of that other balloon that I saw on the notice board at Fragile. At that stage of the game, I wasn't thinking of flying balloons, but a year or so later, not wanting to join the airlines, I decided that was what I was going to do. Okay, and here I am, some 3 years later, flying over a spot in the desert.
Spooky.
With John Samby, not the man that killed the 14 people by bad flying. He actually descended on a balloon beneath him without looking over the side. One of the things about balloons is that you can't see above you. As a pilot, all you can see is around you. There is no way of seeing around the huge canopy above your head. So whatever you did in balloons, and you can watch them in Bristol, as I'm sure many of you have, and in other areas in Albuquerque when hundreds and hundreds of balloons take off, you go the same way the same day. You're in the same bit of wind, but you never climb too quickly, you never descend too quickly. And it's the guy above that actually controls, and he sees people underneath him. He either calls on the radio or whatever. So it's not as easy to collide.
Do they possibly have GoPros, very, very light GoPros on top of balloons now? It must be possible, surely.
Well, I'm sure they could be now, but in those days there weren't. The top.
You've got two immense blind spots, really, haven't you?
You have. Yeah. Big things. Now, the other thing about a big balloon and the big side balloon that you've got here is it's an oblong. It's gone from a square where you can land on any side to only two sides. And as you probably know, the people who are listening to this who've flown in a larger balloon, you've got two sets of handles there, and the balloon always comes in when it's drifting in, hopefully below 10 knots, but 10 to 15 knots. I've actually been out and landed at 25 knots and been dragged 100 yards up a hill through fences, and there was about 40 balloons all damaged in the southwest of England because the weather changed up the Bristol Channel. So, it can happen. But you have to land on that long edge.
Yeah.
And to do that, the bigger the balloon and the moment it gets beyond the normal square is you have turning vents. And instead of just having one rope, which releases a circle at the top, and it's velcroed in, and you pull that at your peril further than about a foot if you're in the air. The parachute at the top, the hole at the top, which is about 2 or 3 meters wide, depending on the size of the balloon, it's held in by Velcro strips, and you'll see the pilot go up and stick it in before he puts the heat in.
Oh, right, okay.
Now, to move it off, you pull a lever, pull a rope, and it goes through a simple angled system to give a bit more pulley, and you can actually drop it down to release the air, then let it go. The other way is when you land and you want to deflate the balloon, you keep pulling. Yeah. So you don't just pull it and let it go to let a bit of air out. The big balloons, because you have to land on the side, and there's a thing called geostrophic force, and as you come down, the air spins one way, and as you go up it spins the other way in the northern hemisphere, and it's vicky-verky in the southern hemisphere. And it's to do with the spinning of the Earth nearer the equator and so on and so forth. But to do that, when you're coming down, you have to maneuver the side of the basket that you need to touch on. So as you go through about 30 or 40 feet in your controlled descent, you see the balloon start moving not straight forward in the wind. It starts to move towards the equator as it's being dragged by all the little particles. So you then have to spill the air out of one side of the balloon, and you get more cables going up, or coloured nylon ropes, reds and greens and gold checkered and so on and so forth. And they go across the balloon into pulley systems and open slots, 12-foot high slots in these big balloons. And the air is spun out around the side. So if you want to turn to the left, you can actually turn it by pulling one of these cables and turn it to the right, and then as you touch the ground it goes along that long side. So there's a lot of things to do in ballooning, and there is not many
instruments. Thank you for educating me. I didn't.
Yeah, that's right.
Never thought about
it. But so getting onto big balloons is a whole new ball game. You've got about 16 people in this particular picture here, I think, 14 or 16 people. The hotter the climate outside, the less you can carry. Yeah. Each size of balloon is predicated to what it can carry. And that includes the fuel, the basket, the framework and everything. It's quite hard work, actually. Physically, you can't go to bed later than 8 o'clock at night. You've got to get 7 to 8 hours sleep. You're up at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. You can only fly for 1 hour after sunrise. The actual balloon is on its side and partly blown up and starting to go vertical in Alice Springs in the morning before the sun breaks the horizon. Within an hour of it breaking the horizon, it goes from -2 degrees, believe me, you're blowing on your fingers, it's so cold, to plus 25, 20. So
physically and mentally, it's probably the hardest thing you've flown, is it? Really?
I think it is, and I've never flown with anybody else. It is, to me, strange, this was a whole new ball game.
Yeah.
But it was fun.
Yeah.
And we used to read out a poet to them, small poetry, the balloons thing. May the sun welcome you with softness. May the wind bless you with warmth. No, may the winds bless you with softness. May the sun warm you with his hands. May you fly so high and so far that God joins us in laughter and lets us down again gently in the loving arms of Mother Earth.
Well, it's very cultured.
We used to read this out to all these people.
We appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, this one here.
Right, onto this old black and white one with a man stood on top of the basket.
Oh, yeah.
Which is you, no doubt.
That was another company I worked for called Spinifex Balloons. He was a young man that put up with John Samby's Putin-like attitude of trying to get all the...
Is that you in the photo?
That's me, yeah.
That is you,
and it was a young man from Sweden, and he had his own balloon company called Spinifex Balloons. And I worked for him as well. I refused to sign a contract for John Samby because I wanted one day to have my own company. And when I arrived there, he made me, my 3 sons, and myself, he gave me a contract, and he said, if you don't sign this, you can't work for me. And It said he forbid any form of balloon in Alice Springs for anything but his company. Right. And I refused to sign it, although every day he kept using me because I'd make another $4,000.
Going on to Swedes, the name's just come. Is it Pearl Lindström? Is that a balloon?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Don't know where that's come from.
Lindstrand. Yeah.
Lindstrand, yeah.
It's a balloon company.
The Scandinavians are quite into it, aren't they? Basically?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There is Lindström, Firefly, Ultra Magic, Cavanagh balloons and Cameron balloons.
Yeah.
Cavanagh balloons were the ones that you see here in this picture.
I think I've read about them so much in the past. I've been fascinated. When I moved to Bristol again, the Balloon Fiesta, I took more of an interest in balloons.
Yeah.
And then, as I said to you, on the up on Cairns, I went in a massive balloon, which I must dig up and photograph because it would be so... I was trying to find it before our conversation. Because it'd be so funny if your little faces stood there alongside me. It'd be really weird. We'll find it one day. But yeah, it's an interesting photograph.
Yeah, it was just de-rigging it.
And also the deformed shape of the basket.
Yeah, when you land, and it's been landing to the right. And as you can see...
So how much were one of these baskets? Where did they make them?
My Dreamtime balloons, you'll find later on, cost over £100,000. You've got... the basket, they found that solid things don't work.
No, not even now with the modern technology and materials.
The wicker was perfect because it allows the gas out.
Yeah.
It's very soft, it's flexible, and it's got...
good for nature, getting one over on the carbon
absolutely.
fibre.
And it's relatively light.
Yeah.
And it doesn't hurt. Inside there are stainless steel tubes.
I guess you'll repair it easy as well, easy-ish.
Yeah, they are. You can. Actually, I've actually done a lot of work on leather work and wicker work over the years.
Yeah,
Yeah,
brilliant. Nice
okay.
photograph.
Well, the next one...
Is Crocodile Dundee.
Now, what happened was when I decided not to sign the contract with John, he did use me, because if he had 144 people to fly and he had 4 pilots, he'd have 6 balloons. So he'd just phone me up in my flat and say, all right then, give you another flight. And I used to make $175 a flight.
Right.
Each person in the balloon, up to 16 people, each paid $175. So you were getting literally 1/14 of the price. And not only that, the guy that got 50% of it was the man in the coach that got the 16 people to sign up for John Sambie. John Sambie sent $1 million Australian a year to advertise Dreamtime balloons. He had his whole book full. I flew 350 days in 1 year. 1 year. And you were only allowed 6 days a week to fly. You had to have 1 day
You're
off.
on less than the minimum wage, really.
Absolutely.
It's terrible, isn't it?
So I decided, and John Sambie knew I would with 3
He's
sons.
taking the piss, and you've got to do something on your own.
Yes, and I did. And I decided to go and have it where the people were going to on the coaches. Because as we landed and gave them breakfast. But he was the 5 Fs. John Sambie was a 5 Fs man.
And
Find
the
them,
5Fs? Yeah.
find them, fly them, feed them, fleece them, and F them off. Right? This was the South African way. He was a Putin. He didn't care about them at all. It was nothing to do with man's first flight and across the bush and talk about the dingoes.
Okay.
And he was just after the money.
Yeah.
And he basically bribed Casa and, send this bottle of whiskey to Casa in
A real
Congo.
chancer by the sounds of it.
Yeah, anyway. John
Okay.
Sambie. So here's a picture of me, and I decided that I'd go to Ayers Rock, where they were all going in their coaches after they'd flown with John Sambie. The coaches would be waiting at the side of the road where we landed. They'd have their chicken and quiche, and off they'd go, pay and buzz off. And I thought, So I became a tour guide at Ayers Rock, went to the people who ran
What,
it.
on the land, just a tour guide?
600 kilometres away, yeah.
Oh, wow.
I got a job with, you can see the badge on my shoulder there, and it's called Uluru Experience.
All right.
And my son followed me and worked on the base as well, and another guy that joined my company. I didn't buy Kavanagh balloon. I didn't buy a Kavanagh balloon. I bought a Cameron balloon, and I had it done with Kevlar shields inside the things. I had really good leather. I had the best.
This is all made in Bristol, of course.
Made in
Shipped
Bristol,
out. Wow.
$100,000.
Wow, yeah.
I had to get
imagine.
a business loan, and Kerry was
Yeah.
you'll see a picture of her next to me is the lady that helped me. She was a tour guide, speaks 3-4 languages, and she turned up one day on one of John Sambie's balloons speaking French. She was with a very, very good French company with people in their 50s and 60s, retirement, all the best hotels, and she just took a shine to the balloon pilot, and we became an item, and she was extremely good on the computer, and for the next 5-6 years
A good business partner, really.
we were business partner.
Brilliant.
And she gave up her job, but while she was doing her job, of course, it was very, very useful. She wrote out something like about 7 different languages for all the things in the business, our big balloon, as you'll see a bit later on, so that they could look at the card, and if I couldn't speak Spanish or German or
Sounds like a
French,
good business plan to me.
she was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. We bought one of the first big Apple computers for it to be done out bush, because we were way out bush.
Yeah.
So anyway, I did this job as a tour guide, but what it gave me the ability to do was to try and sniff up to the management in Ayers Rock. We weren't allowed to fly around Ayers Rock because it was a very sacred
place, yeah.
place. But 80 kilometres away was a place called Mount Connor, which had that beautiful mountain, very flat at the top, as you'll see a picture in a minute. And I got a company to work for that used to take 4-wheel drives out into the bush, stay at night on that cattle farm, and then I got to know the owner and the countryside, and I spent 2 years on a motorbike going out there with a GPS and finding out where I could take off and land, because that was going to be a problem. And the plan was to attract the customers at Ayers Rock,
Yeah.
pick them up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning with a Land Rover or 2 Toyota eight-cylinder, eight-seater vehicles. I could carry 16 people. I would then go out with the other rig, which you'll see later on, which is an army trailer, and another huge trailer with the envelope in, which weighed 350 kilos. It was a huge balloon. It was a balloon that could carry 20 people in England, but 16 people out there. Used up to 250 litres a day. I had huge propane tanks. I spent a year digging and putting in a propane tank behind the cattle farm to have my own propane for my buses and my Land Rovers, and I converted various vehicles into six-cylinder petrol engines into gas, so that everything I was using the gas, and that was delivered into a big tank. Right. So there was a lot of planning, and this picture here is on one of my journeys at night with a few people to explore the countryside around Mount Connor.
Right, and moving on to the next picture.
Okay.
We've got a bit of rain coming now, so it might come out in the background, but atmospheric. In sunny old Weston-super-Mare.
This picture is of Kerry Hogan. She changed her name after about 10 years, maybe about 10 years ago, to Indigo Blue. She didn't like the name Hogan, or Kerry for that matter, but anyway, this is Kerry as I knew her, and she had the quality of being able to stand next to a prime minister or a king who speak a different language. She was an interpreter level type capability with a French, Italian and German and whatever. And her name now is Indigo Blue, and she lives in New Zealand, but that's for Kerry.
All right.
And this next picture is of a picture of Mount Connor with me in one of the four-wheel drive Toyota Land Cruisers, take about 8 people, on one of my tour guides shot. And that mountain there is quite unique in its flat top, the Curtain Springs, named after one of the Prime Ministers of Australia. It's 80 kilometres from Ayers Rock. A lot of people, when they're driving along the motorway, think that's Ayers Rock.
Yeah, I thought it was, actually.
You could walk up it from the back, but the sides are sheer vertical, as you can see on the left of the picture, and pretty well all the way down that edge. Unlike the Ayers Rock, which I've climbed many times with customers going up and down. This one here, you access the top by the back, and it's a gully that takes about half an hour, 3/4 an hour to clamber up. And I've been along that top ledge. I had my own radio aerials up there, so I could transmit HF, VHF, UHF on the ground as well. But I had to, because I was flying a balloon carrying people in a designated remote area, and the CAA required me the ability to call long distance up to 600-700 kilometres for any danger if it had an accident. So that was one of the requirements. Compliance. So I had an aerial on top. Yeah. Okay, so that's Mount Connor.
Good picture. And moving on to the
next one. And here we are. So I then had to get the money. So the first balloon I got was this one here, and I'm taking off in this little 75 type balloons. It's round about, I think it's 56 actually. It's a balloon that my son, who's in the foreground watching me take off, and you can just see on the right hand in the distance there Mount Connor. And what I did was my son wanted to come and join me in the company, which was fantastic, and he did, with his 3 kids and his wife. They lived in a caravan for some time, and we needed to check on the winds, and also, so this is the very first flight over the Mount Connor farm that I can remember. I think many years before me, a Frenchman had gone along and tried something, but he'd got lost on the vast sand areas north of Curtain Springs. Salt pans, I should say, not sand, salt pans. Anyway, this is the flight. I landed on the other side of Mount Connor in the distance. It was probably about 25 kilometres. And I landed on a track heading south, the Imato Road. Okay, that's that one.
Yeah.
This other one.
And now this postcardish.
Oh yes, postcard. This is a shot taken on that flight of me drifting down towards the left-hand side there. You can see the land that I did my business over for a year or so, and I went all over that in a Land Rover, and I've got my own maps.
Was it very? I mean, it probably looked the same, but you got to know the the viewpoints and marker points.
One of the real problems is landing and being dragged, or because of the mulga bushes, very, very strong sticks and stones, and they would go through. And this is what worried me about landing in an unknown area without the green fields and all the other things that you've got. There were tracks, and I had to make sure that wherever the wind was, I could find a track or take off from a track. So I'd go in the morning and I would set off little balloons, birthday candles in plastic cups with the gas that goes up. What was that called? Makes you go hee hee hee.
Helium.
Yeah, you'd have a helium bottle and you'd set off a balloon and you'd time it, and you could see this little candle underneath the balloon, and you'd find out where the wind was going, and that's where you'd go to take off and where to land. So that's a picture of Mount Connor from the top.
Yeah, it's a nice picture, that one.
This is
on to the next one.
The next one is me and my son, thumbs up, on my motorbike. We were into motorbikes, he still is, and my grandsons are into motorbikes. And that's a picture of our trail bikes out on the farm at Ayers Rock in 1995.
And there you get the size of the basket.
After $100,000, it took us about 2 years to get the money. I probably could have bought Kavanagh, but I had so many people that were opposed. Well, John Samby was opposing me, and he phoned up the manufacturers and said, there's this English guy who wants to take away some of my $7.5 million a year. And the 5 pilots that worked for him each produced $1.2 million a year, and we made him $7.2 million in 1993. Each suitcase, where you multiply 16 by 175, was full of cash.
Cool.
And most of it, he never, ever paid his taxes. He was a real trump. I'm serious. And he was a real rogue.
Has he been locked up? Is he still with us? Or?
Well, I don't know what his business is, but people, money talk there.
It's sad, isn't it?
This trailer I found on the coast. And
you found it?
It was an army one.
Oh, I
found it in a yard. We painted it, and that balloon could be launched. Behind it, you can't actually see it. You see my Land Rover to Kerry's right, and behind the big one, it's joined up to another large trailer, which we have one out at Middlezoy Airfield. It's a big one, but it's basically for carrying the engine from the big British tanks.
All right.
And it would carry an 8-cylinder engine.
So a sturdy bit of kit.
A big sturdy bit of kit. And I would go out in my Land Rover, now fitted with gas, tow it into the bush to a place where I knew I could launch it. Underneath that basket were rollers from the military airfields where you do.
The
rollers,
things,
for putting stuff on.
Okay.
Army put tank. What do they call it? Bags.
Yeah.
What's it called? Conveyor belt.
Thing.
With rollers. And I managed to get one and cut it into 6 foot wide.
That's a good idea.
And I had rollers in there, and the sides pushed down, and all I did was I found the field I wanted, or the place in the scrub. On the other side I had 2 rollers going down on the side of the balloon, on the side of the trailer, and then I would push this down.
How much did the basket weigh?
That weighed, I think the whole rig there is about, I think it's 500 kilos.
Oh, okay.
With the gas in it, it's it's quite heavy. And that's a 20-seater in Europe, but it's 16 out there because of the weight. I had the tanks in the middle. I had up to 320 litres of gas. They're very heavy tanks. And 4 compartments of 5. And what would happen when I landed it, I would drive out by myself with this convoy into where I wanted. I'd be on radio with Kerry and another guy in another car, probably James, and I had another guy called Richard, and they would bring 16 people out, 8 per vehicle, and I would tell them exactly which of the 150 places I actually found and did take off the launch site, and they would head for that, and I would already have the basket off by myself with the envelope being pulled out the back of the big trailer, attached to the cables. I had 2 fans on the front of the Land Rover, and the thing would be semi-inflated, as they approached the clearing, as the sun was coming up on the horizon. Yeah, this picture is of a chap called Roger Meadmore, the gentleman at the back, with 2 French hats on, and I'm at the front with a single lady. I can't remember her name, but Roger was an ex-multimillionaire. He was, if you've ever had any pancakes in the 60s, 70s and 80s, in Paris, New York, in pretty well every centre in the world, Roger Meadmore had the lovely lady, and there was a lady eating pancakes. And at the age of 21, he was a millionaire. He could go and buy a Cessna for cash. And he came to Australia, and after 3 marriages, he'd lost his fortune a little bit. But he'd started hot air ballooning, and he actually started ballooning with a guy called Peter Vizard. And Peter Vizard was the #1 ballooning man in Australia.
Right.
And he had his own ballooning company, who I worked for Peter, and it was called Balloon Aloft. And Peter Vizard, as you'll see, if you ever care to look him up on the phone, on the internet, he won in 1983 the 200th anniversary in a competition in Paris of the celebration of man's first flight ever in 1783. 2 men, as you probably know, which were the Montgolfier brothers, Francois Pilat de Rosière and Francois, the Marquis of Hollande. They took off in Paris in a balloon, hot air balloon, and drifted over Paris. And every 100 years they celebrated in France. And Roger Meadmore and Peter Vizard, Roger was their sponsor and bought the balloon, and Peter was the pilot. And they beat everybody else in the world on that in 1983.
No, nice one.
His business then was going well, but one thing and the other, when I met Roger, I was actually flying the Hawker Hunter and biplanes and basically out bush. And he heard about me as a pilot, and he asked me if I wanted to do some flying with him. And I said, well, yes, that'd be good. He was looking for a pilot. And I went on to the Gold Coast, and he had 2 balloons, quite small. He then bought a 160 Cameron balloon, and that's when he asked me if I would like to fly that, because he'd heard I'd flown Cameron balloons. Everything for Roger had to be the best. Everything he did for his passengers, it wasn't the 5 Fs.
No,
it was
the opposite. Yeah.
Wear a French hat, talk about the ballooning,
give
them the #1 thing. And he did that with a 160. And I flew with Roger for some time. We used to play boules together and chess together, but he never understood how to look after his equipment. Everything was, on the edge. He should have spent more time on the trailer, and if you...
I had a boss like that.
Yeah, and it's so important,
to maintain it.
And he was a nightmare to make sure that he'd get up late, or it would be a little bit this, and you can't do that in ballooning. Ballooning had to be really focused. We never parted badly, and we had some great times. But and he's still alive, and I still keep in contact with Roger. Wonderful man.
Brilliant.
But this was landing in Jabumba, not far from my son's house. So that was wonderful flying, just quite nice.
It's a nice picture, isn't it? Just jolly.
Roger
So moving on to the last one.
Okay.
This beautiful
Here's
picture.
Big Blue. Okay. This is one of my first flights, very close to a farm across from the cattle station where I was at Mount Connor. As you can see, it's I don't think Dream Pine Balloons is on there. Oh, it is. It's in gold.
Oh, I see.
Not a particularly good picture, but huge thing and lovely to fly.
Brilliant.
It was actually made out not of normal nylon. It was all like a Kevlar. It was a very, very like strong weave with a plastic cover on it. Not Kevlar. It's very similar, but it's a very strong material.
So going back to ballooning, I mean, that's really interesting what you've been saying about everything. I've learnt a lot on that one, Rick. But do you miss it? When's the last time you flew a balloon then?
The last time I flew a balloon was in 2000. And I came back to England and I flew again until about 2005, 2006.
Oh, this century then.
Yeah. But it was about 18, 19 years ago.
Yeah.
I kept the license. I wanted to fly in Africa. I applied for a job in Africa, but I didn't get it. And then I was applying for a job in Egypt, but unfortunately, thank God, the company I went to, they lost about 5 passengers, I think. They were attacked by men with AK-47s as they went round the Sphinx and
So the ballooning company that you formed, and it sounds to me like it's a brilliant business plan, but people pissed on your fireworks, really.
I think I bridged too far.
Yeah.
It was quite stressful, and in the end, it's a long story, but trying to find somebody that would do that and come out bush and live. And I was living in a cabin, at Mount Connor, and to me, I think because of my background in the military and where I've been, I didn't find it difficult. But my son was living in a caravan park in Ayers Rock, and 3 little kids, they need the nappies changed, and it
takes a lot. Yeah,
it takes a lot to want to do it. So. In the end, it was just too much stress for the people that were supporting me, and that was it. But I love ballooning; it's fantastic.
Brilliant, yeah. Well, it's something nice to cover on this series of podcasts and stuff.
There you go.
It's not really covered that well, I think, really, and it's obviously the connection with Bristol's just massive, isn't it? And Cameron balloons and
one of the places I did fly for was Peter Vizard was at Camden in Sydney, and it was I used to do doubles, and that was a 160, and I would carry 2 lots of passengers, and I'd take off as early as I could. There'd be 8 people in this balloon. I'd fly for 45 minutes minimum, land. The retrieve would be following me, and I'd change over and I'd fly another. This was a really hairy one, this one, and I got them in. I managed to land with about enough, say 35-40 minutes. The wind was coming in, and I had a phone call on my radio from Camden, where I took off from air traffic control there, and as the wind was coming from the northwest, and they told me that the wind was picking up, and I knew that it would. It's a mixing, and as the sun gets up, the air heats up and mixes with the 2,000-foot air, and you start to get quite strong winds.
Yeah.
And I could almost feel it coming. And as I landed in a field not far from a pond, I had these. I think there were 6 in it. There weren't 8 on that last leg, and we touched down about 40-50 metres from this pond. Kerry was on the road not far away watching me being pulled by the wind. What happens if the wind picks up of about 10-12 knots? It flattens the envelope and goes along like a sailboat, and if you haven't pulled quick enough the canopy out the front at the top, it literally pulls you along on the ground. And it went into the pond. These people had a camera. There was 3 kids and 3 adults, something like that. They had camera, and I knew I was going in. And there was an Australian sort of shed, farm type thing on the right. There was a chalet type thing. And there was a guy standing on the veranda watching me. And across this pond was a black cable, electrical wire, but thick, with 2 posts either side of it. It was about 50 metres across this pond. They call them dams. And on the left was a small shed where he had his generator, and then he had his power going across to this house. Anyway, I could see the guy watching me as this balloon slowly went, quite quickly at 12 knots towards this pond. We were pulled into the water. The balloon sort of went up and draped over the electric cable in the middle of the pond. The basket then sank into the water, right? And I couldn't believe what was happening. the water went up to the top of the waists of these, in the middle of the waists of these people on my left, the 6 of them. My tanks were floating, right, and I'm in the middle of this pond with this wire over this thing over a cable in the middle, watching this guy over there. He'd actually turned the switch off, so there was no power coming from the shed, which was very sensible. He saw me drifting across this field. And then Kerry ran across the field and was standing on my left on the bank near this shed. And the most amazing thing was that the drape over the cable, which was about, 15 feet up, the envelope dropped down onto the water, and then the whole thing shifted like a sailing boat to the bank where Kerry was standing about 25 yards away. And the customers they don't know whether this is normal. Oh, it includes a dip, does it? And I'm just sitting there, just keeping calm, just being very, very calm, right? And trying to get this guy's camera, which I had to pay for. That was the biggest mistake, right? And it hit the bank, right? It sort of into the mud. I plopped over the side, and you on all these things, you just go, okay, folks, sorry about that. Sorry about your camera, sir. We'll pay for that. So sure. And then up the bank, there was this bee-bar, bee-bar, bee-bar in the distance. Kerry had phoned the fire engines.
Right.
They run across the field, these guys like this, with their hats on, these Australians, to the edge of this pond. This is a word of a lie. And they stood there, and I went, okay, folks, Kerry, if you could just take... And they were all soggy. Yeah. Would you take them to the hotel in Camden? Hotel in Camden? Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so they disappear, and I'm going like this. Oh, no. Yeah. And the fireman said, are you okay, sir? I said, yes, fine. Could you just give me a hand, pull the basket out? Yeah, not a problem. So they winched up, and these 4 firemen pulled the thing out. The guy from the shed, the guy from the house, didn't even bother to come over. We took the envelope off the top, we dried it out, and we flew it the next day. In fact, it was 2 days.
There's no damage?
No damage at all, except this guy's camera and all their wet clothes.
That guy watching it, if that had been today, he would have filmed it, it would have been on YouTube. It would have been like...
Honestly, so I've actually drifted across a pond with it. And that was because I was doing a double, you see.
An Australian pond, which could have been full
of a dam. It could have been crocodiles in there. And if I'd have gone over that pond, I would have been in what was a nuclear thing in there. There was a really no-go area.
Oh, really?
So the whole airmanship thing was dreadful. I should never have flown that last flight. I should have heard from the air traffic controller at Camden and cancelled it. But, you think you can get away with it.
Right. That's a good one to end on. So Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
And thanks for listening, everybody. And please like and subscribe our channels and give us some feedback. And we'll be back soon with another episode.
Feedback. Don't fly with Rick.
Yeah, cheers, Rick. Thanks.
Okay.